We'll get going and welcome everyone to a webinar on equitable remote learning and some best practices with Listenwise. So we hope this webinar will show you how using podcasts with lessons on Listenwise can provide you the scaffolding, the accountability, and the engagement for all students that you're seeking, especially in a remote or hybrid setting. So we know that using authentic audio with standards aligned lessons helps you meet your content needs, and it is fun for students. So if you're already familiar with Listenwise, we're going to showcase some new product updates that will further the remote instruction, and we're also going to talk a little bit about our SEL collection around topics. So first, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Monica Brady-Meyerov. I'm the founder and CEO of Listenwise. I'm a former public radio reporter and just have a love of learning with audio. And I'm thrilled to be joined by our good friend, Dr. Scott Petry. Do you want to introduce yourself, Scott?
Hi, everybody. I'm a high school history teacher in California, and I've been a Listenwise enthusiast since I think 2016.
That's correct. Yeah, great. So today we're going to talk again about how to use Listenwise in remote learning. We're going to hear some on-the-ground activities that Scott is doing, and how to activate student-driven learning, since giving students agency in remote settings is so key. First, just some of the basics. I'm not going to go into details about how to log in and use Listenwise, but you can sign up for free. It is a free platform for teachers, and then there is a paid premium platform that gets you more features and the ability to create classes and track student progress and enroll students, and also import and using Google Classroom, connect with Google Classroom. We also offer Canvas and other LTI integrations. We know this is getting very popular as more schools are being remote this fall. LTI integration is a big deal. Also wanted to just let you know Listenwise can be used on anything, desktop, Chromebook, mobile device, all great for Listenwise. Let's talk a little bit first about accessing it remotely, because that's where we all are today. So I wanted to just point out that Listenwise is mobile ready. You're seeing a screenshot of what it looks like on a phone. It's got all of our 2,000 plus nonfiction podcasts accessible to you and your students, you to plan your lessons or your students to access the assignments that you create. And we have over 120 elementary lessons. So this is really new for us. We added stories and lessons for grades 2 to 4. So now we're grades 2 to 12. And really got some really awesome new fun podcasts in that lower elementary area too, that I encourage you to screen for them and listen to them, and I'll show you how to do that. The other thing to note is that streaming audio takes a little less bandwidth than like streaming video. I mean, you cannot download the audio, but streaming is still a little bit less than using a video platform, and it's easy to use on mobile. So just a moment on that search criteria. As I said, when you go into our advanced search, you can search by a couple of key things: the subjects that you're teaching, the grade level, or whether you want lessons or current events. And then this new measure called Lexile audio measure. We added this just before the pandemic hit, and it's been a really great asset to teachers and students, because what it tells you is how difficult the audio is to listen to. I'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. So how to use Listenwise in a remote setting. We want to get right into some practical strategies for you that you can take away and use right away. But first, we're thinking about what is the situation right now with our students, and that it's so easy for students not to participate. You know, when you're in a remote or hybrid setting, especially when they're at home, they have other responsibilities in the household. They have video games. They might have siblings. They have YouTube. They have friends. They have gaming. You need to be presenting your students with something that they're interested in. And it's a challenge to maintain their attention. So these are some of the keys we think that we keep it short. Stories are all 3 to 5 minutes long. So that means assigning a quiz, let's say, could take as little as 15 minutes or less on Listenwise, or assigning a quick write assignment after a short story won't take a lot of time. It's all relevant because they're all nonfiction stories about topics that are happening today in the world. And it's simple for you to assign a quiz, which I'll show you as well. And it can be fun with weird news. Scott, what do you think? What's your key to engagement?
Well, what I love about Listenwise is it usually gives you a uniquely personal experience on the historical concept. And I find that my students, I'm thinking about my own daughter who, when she was reading Harry Potter by herself as like a 6th or 7th grader, she started looking for a YouTube video of the teacher actually reading it out loud so she could listen along and read it herself. And I worried about that, and I thought that's bad. And then when I found Listenwise, and I realized that that's actually the best thing you can do for a young reader, is have them listen and be able to follow along with their eyes. They're hearing the words correctly, they're hearing the academic vocabulary and context. And for any struggling reader, beginning reader, EL student, I really think Listenwise is the best to kind of hook them in and get them engaged. And now that you are familiar with these terms, you're ready for a bigger reading.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm just going to jump right over to the website live so that you can see what this looks like. What Scott's referring to is the interactive transcript, which is on every story on Listenwise. Every audio story has the transcript below it, and the transcript and the audio stay synchronized. And this is a research-proven approach to improving literacy. I'm just going to play just a little bit of this story.
After years of pressure, the Washington NFL team will have a new
and I can jump around in it.
I had a good cry.
Tears never changed the name. Why do you think this is?
So students can follow along as they're listening. They can also slow it down by 20% by toggling this little switch right here. And that's another way to also increase understanding if they're struggling readers or English language learners. So it's something that's, this is one of the most, I think, key points of Listenwise is not just listening is not a skill you do in isolation on Listenwise. It can be, but you can also really practice it with your reading. And what I wanted to show you too is the Lexile audio measure. So as I said, we've added these new measures. They are created by Metametrics, the makers of the Lexile reading level, and they're on the same audio scale is similarly built on the reading scale. And the idea is that they have taken into multiple considerations things that are based on the complexity of the audio passage, such as the grammatical use, the language use, the speed at which it's spoken, and come out with a measure of each audio story. So Listenwise uses their scientifically proven algorithm to determine a measure for each story. So you can choose a story based on it being low, medium, or high, which you can screen on Listenwise, or you can look at the grade level and say, well, 5th grade is recommended between these 2 levels, so I'm going to search for those 2 levels. And the way you do that is going into the advanced search and saying maybe you just want to see all medium stories in this Lexile range because that's where your students are. And then you can modify your search based on that. So lots of ways, this is really key again for struggling readers and English language learners to help you find the right story for them so they don't struggle and you don't give them something that's too difficult for them to listen to. So Scott, you want to comment on that?
I was going to say, and you forgot my favorite stat from your research, is that students can listen 2 grades level higher than they can actually read.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yes, especially in the earlier grades. That is the research that shows up until the 8th or 9th grade, they are listening 2 to 3 grade levels higher than they can read. So if you are challenging them and giving them a high story, let's say, and they are able to be supported by the text as they can listen and read at the same time, this is a proven literacy strategy. So a great way for you to be practicing helping them learn to read through listening. I mean, we all know that you can't learn to read unless you know you're listening. Like it is the 2 parts of listening or reading are decoding and listening comprehension. So what is often overlooked is that that after the early grades of learning how to read, there's not many ways for students to practice their listening, even though it's still an integral part of reading. So key point there. Thank you, Scott. The other thing, so what I want to talk about too is sort of a quick idea for engagement. So let's say you're just first week of school. Many of you are already probably past your first week of school. and you're just looking for something that would be interesting to them to do. So you think, well, this is a really, this looks interesting. A teenager cycling across India. Sounds like an inspiring story. I just want to send it out to my students quickly. One of the easiest things to do on Listenwise is share the audio. You take this, you click that button, it pops up a link. You can copy the link and share it out via your own page or email, however you'd like, or you can share the link to your Google Classroom here. But it's just a quick and easy way to do it. There are obviously other ways, such as assigning it as a quiz, creating an assignment, which don't take that much time. But again, you're just always thinking about what's a simple, fun way to get something out to students. So the other thing I wanted to show you as also a really easy, fun, quick engagement idea. Oops, except I didn't, hold on, I need to reset search terms here and then do this. We've added these really fun, weird news segments. Scott, I don't know if you've used these with your students yet. Have you tried any of the weird news stories, the 30-second?
Today was our first day of actual instruction, and so I haven't yet, but next week is when I'm actually going to get started. Each day they're going to have to learn a new platform, Listenwise one day, Common Lit one day, Flipgrid the next day, and I want to make sure that they understand the routines and that they're able to do everything.
That makes perfect sense. Well, as a way to get them practicing on the platform or just need a fun thing to listen to, these stories are great. They are 30 seconds long, and we focus on some of the academic vocabulary in them, but they're more like almost like social media news. So I'm just going to play the whole thing for you, and I want you to listen for the words hurdle and historic.
Good morning, I'm David Green. Belmont Park in San Diego Beach is closed because of coronavirus, but it still has to run its 95-year-old wooden roller coaster every day to make sure it keeps working. With no visitors there, they set out to find some riders who can't get coronavirus, and their solution is kind of adorable. Every half hour, about a dozen giant stuffed animals, giraffes, bears, even rainbow llamas, hurtle through the air on the historic Giant Dipper.
So it's just something that gives you a laugh. Your students will probably enjoy and chuckle about.
No picture of the stuffed animals riding?
Here they are waiting in line for the ride.
Oh, well, little known fact, I actually did my undergrad there. That's in a town called Mission Beach, San Diego, and I spent the best years of my life as an undergrad in San Diego living in that beach community. It's a wonderful place.
That's fantastic. So as you're just kind of a fun, light story, but then the questions are centered around helping with the vocabulary. So that's just another really quick, like fun, engaging way to get students to kind of tune in. And maybe it's at the start of your remote class. Maybe it's something you tell them to do while they are in an asynchronous learning, just for fun and to share their fun, weird news. They can search weird news and come up with dozens of those. So I'm going to pass it to you, Scott, because I know you've been using some choice boards that really help give students some agency at this time of remote learning.
So I did. I was fortunate enough to pair up with my English teachers. I teach 10th grade world history and 11th grade US history. And when we went to the distance learning, I kind of just found the standards, the big standards that I had to hit to get through the end of the year, and I combined all of those classes. So I did a big unit on Hiroshima and the dropping of the atomic bomb. I did a big unit on the Cold War, and I did a big unit on JFK, John F. Kennedy and his ultimate assassination. I had the kids go through the various conspiracy theories because I teach at John F. Kennedy High School, and since we're in his building, we should know a little bit about this. So what I like to do is populate a choice board with a series of Listenwise activities. So there can be as many as 4, 5, or 6 of them, and in most cases I just ask the students to pick 4. And so they pick 4 that are related to the content. I give them a list of titles. They can go in, they can listen to it, they can take the quiz, they can do the discussion board. And do you want to show the
Yeah, I'm just calling it
template
up. I just
Okay.
stopped sharing so I can get this.
So, and I
up.
stole this, I believe I stole this template from a man named Joe Marquez, who does a podcast out here in California called the Sons of Technology. And Joe and his partner, they put together this Google Doc that you could use because all of the Listenwise quizzes are automatically graded, which are great. But what I find is they're not as rigorous as an actual written response. And for some of these, I wanted my students to do the discussion questions. And usually you can choose between 3 and 5 questions, and you can create your own sort of digital discussion board that the students are going to populate. Well, then if you have to grade it for points, you actually have a lot of work to do if you have 150 students who all did this. So what I did is I found this cheat sheet where you can just cut and paste from the transcript the question and the correct answer. And then what I do is I populate this on one half of my screen, and I populate on the other half of my screen the actual results from all the students. And it's real easy then to just cut and paste your correct response as feedback. And you can say, you missed this one, or not quite, what I was looking for was more of this. And it just makes your labor as a teacher a lot more time efficient. And what I've kind of learned over the years is I try and stagger my deadlines with Listenwise, because you don't want to have to correct 150 of these in one day. You want to make period 1 due on Thursday, period 2 due on Friday, period 3 due on Monday, and make your workload so that you can grade it on your conference period or get through it quickly. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to share that and give credit to Joe Marquez for coming up with this genius idea, which I have taken full advantage of. So, and then I always refer to Listenwise as my students' audio training wheels, and I like to build up what I call their listening stamina, because they're going to go from a high school teacher who drones on and on for like 40 minutes to a college professor who might lecture for 3 hours. And how do they keep their focus on that? How do they control their listening skills? And so I use this website called 15 Minute History that taxes them with real college lectures from a college professor. And they really match the world and US history requirements, even though it's a Texas university. I think it's University of Texas at Austin that produces it. And so if you look at this choice board, you can see just how I kind of curate all these artifacts, and I ask the students to choose what they want to do, the way they want to learn, and then you can go to the next slide and I'll show you how I've added, because I really do like the Listenwise, and I'm thinking of the reflection piece now, Monica. But what I've asked my students to do, or what I found out the downside of a choice board is, you give students like say 5 days or 10 days, a week to do all this stuff. And what happens is they do nothing for the first 4 days. And then on the 5th day, when you're actually going to shut off the deadline, they start working like crazy to finish everything up. And I could see this because they would turn in something at 11:01, 11:02, 11:03, 11:04, and I realized that they're not really getting much from this. So I added this component where I said, look, after you do a Listenwise, you have to tell me what you learned from it. What was the new information that it gave you, and what kind of surprised you? And so you can see in this sample, the student's very diligent about saying, hey, I did this one at this time, and this is what I learned, and this is how I connected it to the other things that we're learning. And this is a simple reflective piece that you can require it, but for the students who are doing everything last minute, they're going to do a very poor job at this. So what you have to do is pull up some good examples of this and show your students, wow, this person did a great job with their reflection, and I'd really like to see more of this, because we know from brain research that when you can connect the new knowledge you're getting to something you already know, it sticks.
Absolutely.
So, and that's why Listenwise is great for, and the last thing I wanted to say, is, especially for a lot of these civil rights stories that are in Listenwise, that Selma 50 years later piece. You know, I've heard you do this, present at conferences, Monica, where you talk about the theater of the mind and radio being great at the theater of the mind. And we know that if you just play a grainy black and white video of a historical event, kids don't see themselves there. They don't empathize with those people. But when you hear the dogs barking and the police whistles going and the sirens going and people screaming, you close your eyes and you see that. You see you there in bright, vivid color with all that sensory sound around you, and you really get more empathy for the people who are walking across that bridge and getting beaten by the police. And so that's why I love starting with Listenwise. I love making them reflect about what they've learned from it, because it's a more powerful, more visceral, emotional experience than they're going to get from even the best well-made documentaries.
Absolutely. You say it very, very well. And I would just, add all the neuroscience research shows that you are truly making a movie in your mind, and that when you're listening, your brain is engaged in so many areas, much more so than any other activity. And you're drawing on all these parts of your brain that help to form that full picture. Well, let me step back from that for a minute and talk a little bit more about these features that help with remote. As you were saying, you guys are out there on the front lines of this, trying to plan out your next week or your next month and doing it remotely or doing it in a hybrid situation. So we worked over the summer to really listen to what you had to say about what features worked for you in remote, what more you needed. So we've just released some new features that I'm going to show you, which allows you to do things that make it easier for you to assign Listenwise stories in bulk or also over time. So you can now assign to multiple classes at the same time. There's some improved integration. You can schedule out assignments and even set due times, not just dates. So let's say you're looking at, let's just go to that Little Rock story, because I love that story that you were, what's one of the ones that you were focused on in that reflection, integrating Central High School and the Little Rock 9. And if you wanted to create a written assignment around, you'd click on this button and it would walk you through a 5-step process. I'm just going to go quickly through this to show you how fast this is and how easy it is for you to create a written assignment. It asks you to choose a listen organizer. Fact, question, response is exactly what it sounds like. Our language identification really helps track the listening. Students check it off as they hear. I'll use that one. And then it pre-populates our listening discussion questions as our comprehension questions, discussion questions, and EL questions. So I can just eliminate the ones I'm not going to use with a few clicks, move on to the next step. And maybe I want to hear more, give them more audio of Carlotta Walls, one of the students there. Go to the next step, give them the instructions about when and how you'd like them to do this assignment. And now we're at the point that we've just enhanced. So you can set a due date that is in the far distant future. So let's say the due date is actually the end of the month in September, and it's going to be at midnight. And then the next thing you can choose is whether it's available immediately or later. So you're thinking, well, it's going to be due here, but I'm going to give it to them on the 21st at 7 a.m. And this is all will be seen in your time zone. And then you can also decide whether you wanted to give it to multiple students or the whole class. So that functionality remains the same. So what we've added is the ability for you to schedule out in advance and make sure that the time zone is in your time zone. So now it's ready to go. We've also just introduced also a new look at the classes to separate out your assignments. You can track your students' progress and manage your classes easier. So these are all things we hope will make it a lot easier for you to be using Listenwise frequently during remote learning.
I had quite a few students last year who went online at 9 p.m. Pacific time to finish their assignment, and they were locked out.
Oh,
so they'll
yes.
appreciate that because they forgot about the time change.
Yeah, well, I think that, again, during remote learning, students were doing a lot of different behaviors in terms of assignments. And we learned that we needed to be more responsive to that to help students and teachers. So the other things that we improved are actually just went over all those student-led learning. So in a remote setting, you're going to be giving things for students to do a lot remotely or asynchronously rather, and you also want to really help them focus on what interests them. So you've always been able to select stories based on interest as a student. So when you're in a student account, now what's brand new is that they can also select quizzes and take them based on their interest. So they can search for stories with quizzes, and they can just say, oh, I'm going to show Dr. Petri that I took this quiz, and he's going to see it in his dashboard. The other thing we added is a no bandwidth option. Oops, I always forget this. Sorry. The no bandwidth option is a podcast. So we are turning a couple of the current events a week into a podcast that can be downloaded and used without the internet. And finally, the mobile is just great because it always meets students where they are. Now, obviously, you just talked a lot about how you give students choice, right? Do they embrace that? Do they enjoy it? How do you find it works?
They did. They bought in a lot more, specifically because we had two sides of the choice board. We had an English side and a history side, and students were able to pick one artifact and submit it for both classes. So if they chose the Listenwise option, they got credit in their English class for doing that, and they got credit in their history class. And because of our school's grading policy in the spring, we had a hold no harm grading policy where we couldn't lower a student's grade past the March 13th grade it was. And so the deal I struck with my students is if you do 2 assignments per week, I will raise you a grade. And I had a lot of students who were kind of CD marginal students that really took advantage of that and bumped themselves up over that 10-week period, 1 or 2 letter grades.
That's fantastic. That's a great idea. Yeah, so quizzes are a great, easy way for you to monitor progress and for students to do something in a short time period, but show their learning. And now that they can search for them more easily, we've got icons now that appear on all the photo tiles, so students can see which stories have quizzes and take them and send them to their teachers. And then just an example of what the quiz looks like if you hadn't had a chance to look at it. They're a great way to get authentic language practice too if you have English learners. Just listening to stories in English, hearing authentically spoken English. We know it's not something that a lot of ELs are able to do during this time period because they're just not exposed. They're not in class hearing you as a teacher for 6 hours a day. It's, they're losing ground. So just practicing with quizzing could be helpful. In this case, we also, the quizzes do focus on skills such as inferencing, summarizing, main idea, such as this one. And what's also great is they get immediate feedback. So at the end of the quiz, they can see what they got right and they can see what they got wrong. Now, we've just released some enhanced functionality around this so students can look in their account and see how they've done. Now, so when they finish a quiz, they will see what they got right and what they didn't get right and what the correct answer was. But if they try to go back and look at that later because maybe they want to share that with somebody else, they're unable to get to that. So they can only see it right after they finish the quiz. It doesn't retain those correct answers on the back end for them. And then, of course, we have an easy dashboard for you to be using to quickly see who's completed what, where are your students. We try to make it easy with bar graphs and color coding so that you can have a quick snapshot of how your students are doing on Listenwise and where you need to focus your instruction.
So if I can interject something right here, can you go back to that quiz slide? Is the important thing I've learned, and I gave my students 33 Listenwise quizzes and discussion boards last year. But as you keep giving them more and more quizzes, you're actually developing an individual listening profile on that student. And you'll see that certain students really struggle with identifying the main idea. That's their lowest factor every week. Certain students might struggle with the inference questions. And there's 4 categories that Listenwise uses consistently in every story, and then there's others that kind of rotate through. And if you get a copy of the Literacy Coach's Guide for Listenwise, you'll see that they've actually come out with some really good ideas on how to extend these. So if I know my student's struggling with summarization, here's some summarization activities I can give them. And you can kind of have students analyze their own Listenwise quiz data and have them pinpoint their own weaknesses. And then you see they actually start taking ownership of that, and they realize this is a skill I need to improve. Here's how I'm going to do it.
That's great. Yeah, if you want the Literacy Coaches Toolkit, just put your name and email in the chat and we'll send it to you. We're also going to give you the opportunity to apply for a matching grant, which we can tell you more about. Again, put your name and email in the chat if you want to learn about this special matching grant that Listenwise is offering to help schools with the current budget crisis and the coronavirus pandemic. We've just, created an opportunity to have this special matching grant, which we'll tell you more about if you give us your email, and we'll send you information. We're almost done. I just wanted to give a little more teacher guidance, because in remote settings, we've heard that we like to break down in the lessons what to do before listening, during listening, and after listening. And we found what we've heard from teachers is that asynchronously, it's good to get students to do some of the before listening activities, looking at the vocabulary, activating their prior knowledge, maybe in a discussion board or in a live session, and then do the listening on their own asynchronously, as using a listening organizer or taking a quiz. And then in the live class, maybe using that time to have a discussion around the comprehension questions or the discussion theme questions. That's just one way that we'd suggest, using Listenwise in a hybrid setting. We're going to give you this presentation, and we're going to send you the links to this video, so you'll be able to click on all of these things on the page to get more support, watch other videos, read blogs, go a little deeper. And you can also, remember, sign up for a premium for free for 30 days to explore everything. And then I just wanted to remind you if you're interested in learning more about this matching grant we have, put your email in the chat box. We'll contact you. I know we're running out of time, but Scott, any last words of advice, having been just a core Listenwise user and somebody who's always been very, very strong with remote, digital learning, and now, fully remote?
So one of the things that I have done over the years is I ask my students, because I do a bunch of different apps that deliver content. I like Common Lit, I love Listenwise, I do my own video lectures, I of course rely on the textbook, and then after a few weeks, I actually ask my students, which of these do you prefer learning from? And they almost always prefer Listenwise. And I think it's because the stories are personal and the stories are emotional. And I mean, who doesn't cry when they get to that, the NPR StoryCorps section on Friday? I mean, I'm sitting in my car in front of school crying, trying to pull myself together before I go in the building to teach. So I just think audio has the more power to move people emotionally. And I appreciate your product, and I hope others love using it as much as I do.
Thank you very much for saying that, Scott. I appreciate it. And thank you all for attending today. We really hope you learned something and got some new ideas about using Listenwise and audio in your classroom that you can take away and use right away. So thank you very much for coming, and have a great school year.